I think the most retarded study program that I've ever seen in my entire life is something called Gender, Sexuality, and Fatness. This study program is being started this spring semester in one of the so-called universities in my country. And I genuinely have to ask myself whether I will continue to regard that institution as a university, because it resembles more a kindergarten at this point. I mean, literally, fat studies, gender, sexuality, and fatness. Listen to this excerpt. I'm going to read you the excerpt from, or I'm going to read you an excerpt from the study program. Listen to this. It's so bizarre. Just listen. What is fatness and what does it do? Can we say that fatness creates, enables, disrupts, and destroys gender and sexuality? Fatness as a topic is often ignored, shunned, or only discussed as a biomedical issue. This means that fatness is usually problematized within a biomedical framework, where it is reduced to a medical problem that needs a solution, and by some argue to be an illness or a chronic illness. In this course, we're moving beyond this narrow perspective on fatness, as well as actively engaging with it. Did you understand anything of what I just read? I mean, you could probably understand semantically what I read, but do you understand what this means? Because all I'm hearing is complaining and a word salad. That's what I'm hearing. This is so bizarre. Just listen to this question. Can we say that fatness creates, enables, disrupts, and destroys gender and sexuality? What? What does that mean? How can fatness create gender? Literally, how can fatness create gender? How can fatness create sexuality? It's an invalid question. It's non sequitur. It's like asking what color has the mind. Right? It doesn't apply. You can't ask that question because it's impossible to do. Now, can fatness disrupt gender and sexuality? Well, fatness can't disrupt gender, but it certainly can disrupt sexuality. We know that. If you're fat, if you're a dude and you're obese and you're fat, then you're gonna have problems getting a boner. That's just a fact. So in that regard, it absolutely destroys sexuality. If you're fat as well, chances are that your sperm quality goes down the drain, your testosterone levels drop, and you're probably going to have problems procreating. So in that regard, it absolutely destroys sexuality. Disrupts sexuality? Absolutely. Now, I don't know if the same is true for women. Maybe if they get extra obese, that will affect their menstrual cycle. I don't really know. But I do know that for men, especially the older you get, especially when you're getting my age. I'm 40. I'll be 41 in a couple of months. If I were fat and obese, I would have a very tough time. And especially as the years progressed, I would have had a very tough time getting a boner. Getting sexually aroused, especially if I were fat. So absolutely, fatness can destroy and disrupt sexuality. Now, can fatness destroy gender? I mean, I guess to some degree you could argue that if a man is fat and his testosterone levels drop and he's got the equivalent of, he's got the equivalent of a woman's testosterone levels, because women actually have testosterone as well. They're just much lower levels than men, obviously. Then I guess you could argue that it destroys gender, but it doesn't sort of like turn you into a woman, because there are two genders, men and women. And by the way, I don't think the professors of that study like this video, by the way. I don't think that they like me just openly discussing this. Anyway, this whole question is so weird and so bizarre. And also, the next paragraph that I just read, I'm not going to reread the whole thing because it's just too weird and too long. But it has certain I've got certain issues with it, because it says here, this means that fatness is usually problematized within a biomedical framework where it is reduced, it meaning fatness, to a medical problem, which it is, that needs a solution, which it surely does, because being fat is dangerous, and by some argue to be an illness or a chronic illness. It's absolutely an illness, or even a chronic illness. And the fact that this program actually suggests that is a problem, and that the scope is too narrow simply by calling fatness an illness, that's problematic in and of itself. That's the real issue here, right? You're essentially teaching a generation of fat, lazy, and obese kids that being fat is okay, and that being fat is some sort of identity, which is even more dangerous than problematizing fatness, because fatness is a problem, right? It is. It's objectively unhealthy to be fat. You just can't argue otherwise. If you do, you're wrong. You're objectively wrong. That's a fact. Now, I get very, very passionate about this topic, actually, because I used to be fat myself. I actually weighed myself earlier today, before I started eating. I just came off a 36-hour fast. I like to do fasts once a week. I weighed in at a lean and ripped, well, certainly not ripped, but a lean, I want to say, 77.8 kilograms, which roughly equivalent, which is the rough equivalent of 171 pounds, right? Which is, it ain't too bad. I'm 5'11", so I should weigh that. I probably could have dropped down even more to 168, maybe even 165. I don't really know. But here's what I do know. I used to be fat. I used to weigh a whopping 260 pounds or 120 kilograms. I was on my way to becoming morbidly obese. I had elevated blood pressure. I had these nasty sweat stains in my armpits, on my chest, on my back. I couldn't wear a sweater inside, or hardly even outside. I mean, it would have needed to be freezing cold for me to even consider to even consider wearing something resembling a jacket or a sweater or something outside. Now I'm freezing to death every single day, because it was one benefit being fat, and that was fat insulates, so you're not freezing so much. That's the only positive thing with respect to being fat. Now, and by the way, here's an important caveat. I'm not saying that fat in and of itself is dangerous. It's really not. Your body needs fat. If you don't have some fat on your body, you're gonna die. Imagine your poor organs. All of these Mr. Olympia dudes who weigh, I don't know, they weigh 100 kilograms in pure muscle. That's not healthy. That's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. What if they catch a cold? They have no spare tissue to burn. They could die easily. Even a lung infection is dangerous. It's deadly. Even if influenza is deadly. And women who do the same thing, lose their period, is horrible. It's absolutely horrible. And that's why I'm just speculating that maybe perhaps if you're a woman and if you're obese, then maybe you lose your menstrual cycle as well, or maybe your menstrual cycle gets a little wonky and out of control. I don't really know. I'm just speculating here. Anyway, as a former fat person who shed more than 80 pounds, I absolutely know what it's like to be fat. And I knew deep down when I was fat that that was a medical problem. I was just too arrogant and too lazy to admit it myself. You know, I would give out the usual array of excuses. Oh, I'm just big boned. Oh, I've always been big. Oh, I'm just a little bit rough hewn and coarser built and wider than most people, blah, blah, blah. All that kind of crap. Which, of course, big boned. It's so dumb. No, I wasn't big boned. I was just fat. I just had more fat around my waist. Anyway, being fat is a problem, and it is a societal problem. And if men can't get a boner and get their dicks up, and if they're too lazy to shag a woman so that they can't sexually procreate, well, then they can't have more kids. Which, the conspiracy theorist in me will like to believe that this program is designed to make people want to have less children by accepting that they're fat and by intermingling it with gender and sexuality, which has nothing to do at all, really, with being fat. But they want to lump it all together and cry about racism and bigotry and whatever other garbage. Here is my point with this long-winded rant, really. This is persuasion done tremendously wrong. This is taking a problem, this is taking an issue and turning it into a victimhood and turning it into a lifestyle and making people proud of being sick, or proud of being ill or sick, really. Choose whatever term you like. That's my main issue with this whole thing. This is persuading people who are on the track to living a horrible life, to continue living a horrible life and gradually destroy themselves, rather than acknowledging that, look, you're actually fat. This is a medical issue. This is an illness. It could develop into a chronic illness, and it could lead to other potentially deadly illnesses, such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular illnesses, heart attacks, cardiac arrest. Well, I guess those are the same things, roughly, but you know what I mean. And ultimately, perhaps even cancer. No, I'm not a doctor, and this is just me speculating, but just think for yourself. Do your own research. It is absolutely a medical issue. It is absolutely an illness. And here is my take on this from a persuasion perspective. This is the same way of arguing that it's glorified to be poor, when it's not really at all, when it shouldn't at all be glorified to be poor and broke. Because there's nothing glorious about being poor and broke. There's nothing cool about not having money. I know what that's like too. Because I used to be very, very broke. And in fact, for a limited number of months, some years ago, I couldn't even pay for both food and gasoline for my car. I needed to choose between filling up the tank, filling up the diesel engine or the diesel tank in my car, or paying for food for myself. That's not cool. That's not cool at all. And I was totally self-inflicted, by the way. And I'm not going to go more into that. But here's where I'm going with this. Accepting that being poor and broke and having no money wasn't an option. It wasn't anything that I was prepared to do. Because I knew that at the end of the tunnel there was light, and I was physically able long term to dig myself out of the deep hole that I found myself in. And luckily I managed to do so, and today I'm doing much better than what I used to do back then. Anyway, being broke isn't cool. That's a problem. Being fat isn't cool. It's also a problem. And both of these conditions don't need to be anything permanent, and they don't need to be part of your identity, and you don't need to accept them. as the reality, and you certainly don't need to accept them either as your permanent state, because there are solutions. Just like you can sell all the crap that you really don't need, pay off your credit card debt, work a second job, work double shifts, live horribly, don't buy anything that's cool, pay your bills, then yourself first, wash, rinse, and repeat until you're done paying off your debt. So can you pay off, proverbially, your fatness debt by going to the gym, eating more healthy foods, cutting down on processed sugary foods, and drinking water instead of Coca-Cola, for instance. It is possible to do something about it. And that sort of victimhood mentality is precisely the sort of bad persuasion that's designed to keep people down, which is the inverse of what you should be doing. You should be using good persuasion to lift people up so that they can slim down and fatten up their bank account. Because that's literally the only thing that should be allowed to be fat in your life, is your piggy bank, your wallet, and your bank account. Those three items: piggy bank, bank account, wallet. Those can be fat. You should be slim. And let that be the persuasion lesson of the day. If you want to learn more about persuasion for business, then get subscribed to my email list. The link to do so is in the episode description wherever you're watching and or listening to this. And I'll see you there.